All righty. Hello, everybody. Waiting for everybody to roll in. Um, Super excited to kick this off today with Devin. Welcome to our webinar. Giving people just a second, I see folks already streaming in. Thanks for joining so far. Welcome to our webinar, Design, Research, and the Bottom Line. Excited to get things officially rolling in just a couple of minutes. I'm Stevie. I'm joined today by the one and only Devin Harold. Like I said, I'll officially do some intros and kick things off. But as we're waiting for people to start filing in, I do have a quick, fun question for the chat and for you, Devin. Devin and I were actually both attended weddings this week. So I guess I'm curious for the chat, what is the most memorable part of any wedding? Is it the food, decor, music? Devin, what do you think?
Hmm. For me, I think the most memorable part is probably how they conduct the ceremony. I think that's always really unique and telling about a couple, their intimate relationship, their relationship to their family, and how they want to tell the story of the day. So that tends to sit with me. One piece of that this week was the wedding was at a zoo. And so part of the like right after the ceremony, they actually brought out a huge hawk, and they taught everybody about how far the hawk's eyesight is and how wide the hawk's wingspan was. And I think that told a lot about the Harrison, who's my brother-in-law, and his now wife Olivia, and how they care about animals and wanted that to be a huge part of the day. I just thought that was really unique and really cool.
I love that. That's such a cool venue. And I know you mentioned there was also a large porcupine there.
Yes, that was after the hawk. So after the hawk, they brought in the porcupine, and her name was Shelly, which I thought was a little bit of a misnomer, but
Mhm.
neither here nor there. Really cute. Crawled on top of kind of a log and was being fed little treats as we learned about her quills and how she doesn't actually shoot her quills, but she likes to flare them up when she feels a little bit threatened, something like that. But really, really cute. It was great to see the animals and giraffes in the background while they were getting married during the ceremony. So that was very memorable.
I love that. Well, the more you know, everyone signed up for a design and research webinar, and we're learning about hawks and porcupines at the top. Well, thank you so much, Devin, and also loving all these answers. Let's go ahead and get started. So hello again, everyone. My name is Stevie. I am the brand marketing manager here at DScout. I'm excited to welcome Devin Harold to the DScout stage. Devin is the former design and research lead at Capital One, and we'll be discussing design, research, and business impact today. Devin, would you like to tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm really excited to be here today and to talk about a bit of a model of how to distribute work within your portfolio, but also just a bit more about my experience. I have over 13 years of experience in the field of user experience research and design, leading design for agency and in-house settings, and then also research most recently at Capital One, where I was heading research for our financial services division and also the design team lead for our top of house products. So really fortunate to be here and excited to share some of my background with you.
So excited to get into it. Really quick for everyone, before we dive in, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. I see that the thing is on good. And we will send you the recording afterwards, so feel free to just sit back and relax, and you'll get the information in an email after. We'll also have some time for Q&A at the end, so please, I encourage you to use the Q&A box rather than the chat. It's easier for us to pull them out towards the end, and we'll get to as many as we can. And we'll start the conversation with a quick poll to everybody. Let me start the poll. Okay, I hit launch. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you that your current approach to organizing your research portfolio is effective? 1 being not at all confident and 5 being extremely confident. I'll give folks just a couple of seconds here. Looks like we have like 3/4 of the way. Um, okay. I'm gonna go ahead, get your last answers in. I'll hit end in just a second and share it with everybody. Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and end for now. Share the results. All right. Hopefully y'all can see my screen. It looks like a majority, 56%, picked about 3, middle. Devin, thoughts on that?
Middle of the road seems like to me that says It's a bit of a toss up. You're not super confident, but it works perhaps maybe half the time or in some respects. And it'd be interesting to unpack that more, but I'm excited to share a little bit more today around something that might help get that three up to a four or a five.
Yes, love it. That's our goal, try to get everyone to a 4 and 5. So let's dive in. Devin, let's first talk about your experience leading research and design teams. What are the similarities and differences in how these teams approach research and their studies?
From my experience, both leading design and research teams, but also being a designer and researcher myself, and sitting in those roles and in those seats, a huge similarity, and I think this goes without saying for the entire cross-functional team, is that you're trying to gain confidence around solutions for customers and using research as a way to gain that confidence by understanding where their problems are, where opportunities lie for improving their experiences, but also benefiting the business. I think that maintains itself true, whether you're a designer or a researcher. I think also both are concerned with timing in today's pace of rapid development and the ever changing field of UX, but also just business in general. It's hard to find time to do the right type of research and in the right ways, whether you're a designer or whether you're a researcher. I think we all share in that pain point. Where they differ a little bit, I think, in their approach to thinking about research. Researchers often have more experience or expertise or even training for more complex methodologies and may be a bit more creative in how they triangulate data in order to create a really robust answer to the business question at hand. And that's often the goal of researchers, and often researchers that I've led or talked with or worked besides. They really want to make sure they provide the absolute best answer to the question being asked of them by the product team, by the product manager, or by leadership. When they're tasked with that challenge, they want to make sure they're doing it right. And designers are very similar. They, of course, want to make sure they're doing it right. But I think what differs is the pragmatics behind how they approach research. When I led design and when I've led design teams, often they're balancing many things. Of course, they still have design in their title. They have to do something with the insights that they learn. They have to then activate them in creating comps, approaches, or concepts that move those insights into action. And because of that added responsibility, they're often trying to get to what is the minimum amount of research that I can do that gets me to the right answer really quickly. And so the time pressure is different in a researcher and designer because researchers are trying to get the best answer in the most efficient way, and designers may want the most easy to reach answer in the quickest way because of the different pressures that they have within an inherent of their roles. That's been my experience. It's not a sort of tried and true for every single designer or researcher out there, but I think that that may sit with the majority of us.
Yeah, I think that from what I've heard across the industry, that seems to reign true in a lot of areas. But in terms of, we talked a little bit about this, uh, designers' approach to research. Looking at designers specifically, where can they maybe weave research in more often to be most effective? I know that you mentioned that there's a tendency to like want to get research done quickly so we can get to the insights and get to making the change or making the decision. But it might be beneficial to put it in a few more areas, even though it maybe takes a little bit longer. What types of projects should they prioritize?
Yeah. I'll say one obligatory answer to this question is early and often. Research should always be part of the process, ideally in some form or fashion. But in terms of how to prioritize it and what would be most beneficial, I think you need to think critically about what is the cadence or the process in which you are developing products. Are you following more of a lean or agile methodology where you're doing 2 week sprints? Are you doing something more waterfall, or is it kind of a mixture of both? What is the rhythm at which your cross-functional team is operating, and identifying then within that rhythm, where could you provide the most lift for driving research initiatives? Can you fit in a set of usability tests or generative interviews every 2 weeks within those sprints? Could you carve out a research sprint, kind of Google Venture style, and just make sure that you have dedicated time to doing that? And one of the things we're going to talk about in a few minutes is maybe there's an opportunity where you are not leading the research yourself, but others alongside you are, and you're consulting with them, or you're creating a system of enablement where they can actually go off and help to generate the insights that you need to make critical design decisions without necessarily needing to be the person leading the research yourself. And that frees you up in your capacity to be able to fit insights into your process without you having to duplicate yourself and be in two places at the same time.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I feel like that's a great segue into this. Ideally you think research, it's like, oh, I have to do all the research. I have to get all the insights myself. I have to pull this in somewhere. How do I can't duplicate myself, as you said. So on the reverse, when should designers really lean on their research colleagues, or how can we make that relationship more beneficial for both teams to ensure that everyone's getting the insights they need?
Yeah, I love this question. I'm going to start with potentially a hot take. I don't know if it's a hot take, but one in which I think will be perhaps new to some researchers and designers that are listening to this. But it is very common in our field and in our industry to focus on bifurcating where designers and where researchers do the work based on methodology. It is tried and true, and I've heard this time and again, that researchers should lead generative research only or predominantly, and designers do evaluative, because it is expected that that's where their expertise lie. But I don't necessarily think that that is entirely the case. I've worked with designers and have led design teams that have deep expertise, even PhDs in research specifically. And they are just as capable as their research partners, but they just don't hold that title at that point in their career. Why would we want to hinder a designer in doing the necessary insights gathering activities that will enable them to make stronger decisions for the business, for their product partners, and for their customers, just based on methodology alone? And so I actually recommend that in order to weave in a good distribution of work amongst designers and researchers, rather than focus on methodology, you need to focus on where does your expertise lie and where does your capacity allow for that expertise to really flourish. And what I mean by that is, if you have expertise of doing generative research, but right now you have a deadline in 2 weeks and you have a ton of design concepts to churn out, you don't have the time for doing deep, in-depth research. But your research partner does, who's maybe assigned to that product area, then lean on them in that case. And in that particular sprint or that particular quarter of work that you're planning, allow them to really lead in that area of research. Or if you do have time to do generative research and you're focused on one product feature, but your researcher has a bird's eye view to multiple product features, maybe it's best to lean on them for developing something like a CSAT or UX measurement framework that looks across product areas. And so the crux of this is to really not limit yourself by just methodology alone, but work with your research colleagues in understanding who has the capacity and who has the expertise for taking on specific types of work, so that you can identify, small plug to a few minutes from now, where you lead, where you want to consult, and where you might enable for that work to get done.
Yeah. Any other tips on how these two teams, or specifically, of course, products in the mix as well, but looking at design and research specifically, how these two teams can maybe be a little bit more collaborative or a little bit more just overlap in more ways?
Well, I think just being honest about that expertise and the skill sets that you have on the team and the makeup of the team will be really helpful, and making sure that you understand who sees what opportunity areas. So if a designer sees that they need research in this part of the product, but a researcher sees that they need it in that part of the product, coming together to form a consensus around what is all of the opportunities for insights gathering that are there. And then of those, what do you want to prioritize? Because you will always have too much work to do and too little time to do it. That is not just unique to our field or the industry of user experience design and research. That's just the nature of anyone's job. And so I think working with your cross-functional team on identifying the opportunities at hand and then prioritizing what you should focus on, I think that will help make sure that everyone's on the same page and working really well together.
Yeah, yeah, that's some great advice. So we talked a little bit about how these teams can collaborate, but let's dig deeper into research quality a little bit more. We actually recently ran a survey on People Nerds for folks across research, design, and product to discuss the impact of quality research specifically. Shout out to anybody here who took the survey, report coming soon. So Devin, in your experience, what are the most important components of quality research and insights, and what should teams look out for to ensure that, I mean, we talked about, UX research is kind of table stakes at this point. How do we ensure that that research is done well and the insights are actually quality and, effective for future product developments or feature developments?
I love this question too. I will say I'll answer in two parts. I'll first give the answer and then I'll kind of like dissect them a little bit. I think quality research and insights are best done when they're quick and clean, which I'll talk about, and when they answer the true question at hand. So let me unpack quick and clean. There's a mantra that we all know. It's quick and dirty. Oh, how do we get some quick and dirty research on this, or quick and dirty this or that? And that phrase is used for a number of things outside of our field. But the word that really irks me in there is dirty. Because if you're doing dirty research, you're going to have a dirty product. Because you could be answering the wrong questions or answering those questions in the wrong ways by delivering the inoptimal solutions for customers, because it's either biased research that you did or you did it too quickly. You're not really covering the basis of the product or the experience that you need to do research on. There's something in there that begs the need for quality, and that is dirty research. And so what I like to say to my teams, and anybody who's worked with me or been on my team before, you've heard me say quick and clean research. I don't take credit for that, by the way. I heard it somewhere, but I forget where, and I just love it. But that is a bit of a difference. It understands the need for speed in today's fast-paced development, like product lifecycle of every company, but it also highlights that we need to make sure that we're still doing sound research with sound methodology, making sure that we're asking unbiased questions of the right customers in the right contexts. And we need to strike a balance between the sort of confliction of both of those. How do you do it quickly, but how do you maintain it to be clean? And that challenge is something that is inherent in each of us when we do research. Now, the second piece of this, if you can accomplish quick and clean research, your insights also need to make sure they're answering the right question. Often, when, well, I won't say often, but I'll say sometimes, when we're doing quick research, the methodologies that enable us to move at great speed may not answer the actual business question that we had in the very beginning. That might actually require more time, more rigor, more customers to ask. And so right sizing the methodology or the approach to research with the actual question and the answer that you're looking to get for the business and for your team, that's really important. And that's why it's one thing to do quick and clean research, but if it doesn't actually answer the question that you had at the beginning, then a few things are going to happen. You're not going to be able to make adequate decisions based on where you need to go next with the product or with the business. And even the design or research team could take a reputational hit because now we've delivered insights that aren't actually very helpful. And now it may start to beg the question, is research always like this? Is this what we should expect from doing research? Maybe we shouldn't do it so often. Or maybe we need to rethink how we do research in this business. And those are the wrong problems to solve for, but it really comes back to making sure that you're answering that right question. And so the components, when thinking about them together, with every project, with every initiative that you strive to conduct research within or for, make sure that you're thinking about what is the most efficient way that we can get this answer that maintains the integrity of research itself and truly answers that right question.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I feel, and you mentioned the repercussions of doing quick and dirty research or even like research that just isn't effective or answers the right question. So that kind of naturally leads me to um, talking about other repercussions of that. In that same People Nerd survey, we actually asked folks about the impact of poor quality UX research on a product or feature. And 87 participants said that poor quality UX research wastes time and resources on ineffective solutions. So can you walk us through some examples of how investing in quality research and design directly impacts the bottom line?
Absolutely. So we all have, well, not all of us, but most of us have probably heard of the mantra around it costs 100 times more to fix a defect in production than it does in design. That phrase or that insight comes from a study done by IBM a few decades ago that was specifically looking at defects within the product development lifecycle. When defects are found earlier on, it's quicker and easier to fix that defect than after it's in production. Think about it this way. You have a designer who creates a feature that's going to go to market and get in front of customers. They design that feature, but after running one quick usability test, you know that there are issues, there's defects, there's problems with that experience that need to be rectified. Now, those things could take a designer just a few hours to fix in terms of their time investment. But now imagine that same feature without that research identifying that same issue. The designer creates it, then he works with the product manager, the software engineer, the QA analyst, the marketer, the salesperson, leadership to finally get that same feature off the door, let's call it in a month and a half, 2 months time that it may take to stand that feature up and get it in front of customers. Now you have a plethora of issues on the hand when the customers actually experience that issue in production. Not only have you probably lost a sale or a customer, but now that entire cross-functional team needs to rework that feature all over again. And so that's a simple example where just a single feature could require a massive investment in redoing work that could have been found a whole lot earlier if quality, quick and clean research was done a whole lot earlier within the process. And so that's why it's important, as the other sort of phrase goes, test early and often to make sure that we're building quality products from the beginning and making sure that we're really solving the right issues well before we invest so much time and effort in getting them off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was just you just mentioned a few teams that are directly affected. Like depending on the size of the issue, you looking at from a marketing standpoint, like you could be looking at huge brand damage. You could be looking at just large, long-term impacts of that, of either no UX or poor quality UX that is directly affecting your products and things that are just difficult to directly measure. So doing it right the first time does pay off.
That's right. And to your point about reputational damage, if you are in a highly competitive environment, customers just need to experience that one pain point once, and they will go to your competitors, especially if it has something to do with a large investment of their time or their money. They don't want to invest that same time and money in something that seems inherently broken or doesn't suit their needs. And you want to find that out a whole lot sooner, and ideally in a controlled environment long before it really gets in the hands of customers in the first place.
Yeah, and not to deviate us too much, but one key area of that is especially for Gen AI products, like that's a critical moment to really invest some time in pre-research to or research throughout the entire development process to make sure that that's getting out in a safe way and can be effect and actually useful for customers.
Absolutely.
So one huge component of quality research is actually, like you mentioned, that you alluded to throughout, properly allocating work. And you actually have a great model for this. Can you walk us through what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about this idea of leading, consulting, or enabling. So this is a model that I've used within my teams, both in design and research context, to help clarify roles and distribute project work that enables you to identify basically who does what. And that really helps you to mature your practice and your function by maximizing business impact. And the reason being is because you can identify where your expertise lies in order to drive the most value for certain projects or certain initiatives, while also freeing up your capacity so others can work alongside you to continually deliver impact for the business. So that defining responsibilities and activities, for example, research, is really important. One thing I want to highlight, though, is on the next slide, that this was inspired by Behzad Serjani's original driver, navigator, and passenger model for research democratization. He also advocates for a vector of thinking about risk and the level of business risk involved in the type of research that you do. Now, a little bit of a difference in his model versus the lead consult enable. There's two primary things that I see have been successful in identifying where you lead, consult, and enable. The first is that you can do this with any suite of project work. Today, we're talking about research, of course, because that's really near and dear to all of our hearts. But you can bifurcate your portfolio of work. Doesn't matter what it is. You could be a software engineer or lead engineer and bifurcate work by you lead, consult, and enable, or product managers can leverage this same framework and mindset as well. I also am not going to advocate on one single line of risk being a vector that you have to evaluate projects on. It could be portfolio importance. It could be leadership lean. It could be where your competitors are leaning. It depends on your context within your specific company and organization, what vectors you want to place on this in order to evaluate projects priority. But that being said, let's unpack this model a little bit more so you can get a sense of what it means to lead, consult, and enable in different types of work. So as the sort of title of each section dictate, when you lead a project or a specific initiative, a piece of research, that's something that you own in its entirety. So let's say in the upcoming sprints, I'm going to lead a diary study. That means that I'm going to be the one who's advocating for its use and identifying where and how the insights may be used to help benefit the team and the business. That means I'm going to develop the moderation guide. I'm going to get feedback from folks, and I'm going to be the one responsible for actively doing the research itself and then reporting on those insights. That's leading, full ownership and responsibility. And the questions you should ask yourself when you're determining who leads a specific body of work is who has the desire to do the work in the first place. You may have multiple people on the team that actually have a desire to lead specific research. I've mentioned before that I've led design and research teams that have deep expertise in generative research. So you may have a design lead and a research lead who both want to kind of partner or lead specifically a diary study. And that's a very good thing. It's a good problem to have. And you have to determine then who has the expertise based on that particular project that you're evaluating and who should take on that project. Look at the individual's expertise or the expertise on the team in order to determine who's best equipped to be able to lead that project. And then, of course, the bandwidth. If you have two people who have the desire and two people who have the expertise, who has the time? Often, researchers have more time to lead more complex or triangulated methods because that's the nature of their role. They were hired to lead and to drive research primarily, so they have more hours in the day to do that. Whereas in contrast with their partners, often we see that product managers and designers have multiple hats they're wearing. They have other responsibilities, such as helping to, of course, lead the product and all the timelines and the interdependencies of making that product come to market, if you're a product manager. Or a designer, of course, helping to drive content strategy, working with developers, and creating design comps or other responsibilities, as we all know. And so identifying who has the bandwidth is really crucially important. And then finally, who benefits from the work. This will be more applicable in the enablement section. But as you think about all the research work that could be done in a given time period, who's ultimately going to benefit? Is it just going to be the product team that will benefit from using those insights that you're looking to generate? Or could it be the whole company? Does the whole company need to know what you're going to learn from the research that you're going to conduct? All of those questions and those levers will help you identify who's best to lead. So let's move over to consult. Consulting is very similar to leading, but it really is kind of shared ownership. So it means that you may not be conducting every single piece of that research yourself. Maybe you're in a 50-50 partnership. Going back to my example, you have a lead designer and a lead researcher who really want to do that diary study. Great. If they both have the time and they both have the expertise, allow them to partner up and really build off of each other and their expertise to drive quality solutions for that specific research project. And so maybe the designer takes the lead on the moderation guide, or maybe half the diary study, and then the researcher does the other half. Maybe the designer leads some of the survey questions and even follow-on interviews of the participants, and then the researcher takes the bulk of the analysis. However you want to divvy that work up, that is a good example of how you can consult. Another example of consult is something that we are not strangers to, and that is maybe a lead researcher hosts office hours for product managers to come and sit in and learn from that researcher and how to conduct their own small usability tests. Or maybe the researcher steps in to help train designers on a new method, and then they take that into their design sprints to move forth and deliver products that meet customers' needs, because they are consulting with the researcher to make sure they're steering their work in a way that helps to drive quality, like we talked about earlier. And that's something that the researcher doesn't have to lead themselves. So it frees up their capacity. Often, ratios based on what I've seen in recent industry reports and teams that I've led, there's fewer researchers than there are designers, and there's fewer designers than there are developers. And so when you think about those natural ratios, researchers often do a lot of consulting, especially in a world that is ever increasing in terms of its openness to democratization for research. So researchers will spend a lot of time consulting with designers and with product leaders on how to do studies of their own. And that's a core piece of consultation as well. The same levers are important for consulting as they are for leading. Who has the desire to do this work? So, for example, you can't consult on conducting a usability test if your product managers want nothing to do with doing a usability test. You can consult with them all day long, but it's probably not a good use of your time. But if they have the desire, and if they also have the expertise to be able to lead some studies, doesn't matter the methodology, but whatever makes sense within your particular business, then that's something that your researcher or your designers can consult on as well. And then enablement. This is a bit different. It's really an interesting space when we talk about enablement, because it's not just the same thing as consulting, but less. Enablement, I want you to think about the design and research team creating their own sort of internal products and internal services. Imagine your design and research team as a product team in itself. What are the services or the internal products that you might create in order to enable insights at scale? An example of this is if you don't have a research repository, then there's not an opportunity for anybody in the business to learn what you've already learned or to reference previous studies that you have done before. That could be a great opportunity for enablement, because without that, you may have leaders or product managers knocking on the same door and asking the same questions that we've already answered months or weeks before. And instead of requiring the researcher or the designer to dig up those old studies or those old insights and have to kind of go through the ringer of constantly re-evangelizing the same information, you could have a self-service model where everything's in one place and they can go and learn on their own time with very little to no engagement or need from you to extend your bandwidth to them. That's a good example of enablement. Another one could be maybe you provide a list of questions that you want to ask every customer, every single customer that you have in your product. You want to ask them 3 questions as a baseline of understanding their expectations, maybe when they start using your product. But you can't be in the room with every single customer. And often, designers and researchers aren't the ones owning that relationship. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the sales team is. Can you give them the 3 questions to ask of every single customer that joins the product. And maybe that's a way of enabling your sales team to gather really great insights for you and your organization without you, your designer, or your product manager ever having to be in that conversation. Because the enablement stems from using your expertise to create unbiased questions that'll be helpful for the product, and then giving that to the sales team that has the relationship that you're looking to capitalize on, and the touch point that you're lacking with that customer. So enablement is about creating the systems, the networks, or the internal services that allow you to gain insights or intelligence without you having to extend very much time or effort yourself. And I think when you look at your portfolio of work in this way, specifically research, you're going to be really amazed at how much you're going to be able to spread yourself and your team, and how much you'll be able to accomplish. Because instead of feeling like you have to own responsibility and be a billion places at the same time, there are things that you might be able to pass along to others, enable others to do even without your presence at all. And that will really allow you to make headway on new areas of the business and drive impact at a greater scale than you ever thought possible before.
Yeah, I love that. The art of just because it says research does not mean that researchers own it, or just because it says design doesn't mean that designers exclusively own it. That's an awesome model, and we'll actually drop a link at the bottom of the slides to Devin's actual model, so everybody here can keep it for themselves and use it. So, Devin, to wrap up this portion a little bit, what are the top 3 priorities designers specifically should focus on today to effectively demonstrate their impact and value? Something tells me that there's going to still be research involved, though.
The top 3 priorities designers should focus on. I think the one would be determining where you have that expertise and capacity that we talked about. Being really honest about where it is that you have the ability to lean in versus where you don't. And I think to what you just said, Stevie, like not feeling like you have to be pulled in a million places at once just because and it has the word design on it or the word research on it doesn't mean that you have to own it inherently. And it doesn't mean that others are taking that away from you either. You can have a place in shaping that and helping to guide that up front without having to own the responsibility of delivering it yourself. So I'd say priority number 1 is, ironically, identifying your priorities, and doing that by identifying where you have time and space to lead and where you don't. I think the second thing is working with your researchers and identifying kind of what we just talked about, using that model, where you specifically should focus your insights gathering expertise. Should you focus within your sprint cadences in developing rapid usability tests or generative interviews relative to the product area that you're focused on? And then where should researchers spend their time? So identifying not just what you have the capacity to do, which is number 1, but number 2, then identifying, okay, what's the actual split based on the work you have in front of you right now? And then I think the third one is really just focusing on what are the right answers that the business needs now. I like to think about designers have a really unique area of expertise when it comes to focusing really deeply on something that's right in front of them. And often they're thinking about every permutation, every challenge, every opportunity inherent within an experience or a product that they're focused on. Use that superpower to identify, okay, based on what you need to accomplish now, what you're designing, what you're focused on now, where are the insights going to drive the most lift? Like I said earlier, there's 1,000 things you could learn, but there's only a few things you probably should learn right now. So really identifying where insights are going to drive the most lift for yourself, your product partners, and your business, both now and then what's on deck, maybe 3 sprints from now, or maybe next quarter, to help get ahead of a bit of a research roadmap, so to speak, and get a sense of what's to come so that way you can prioritize your time and your priorities effectively. I think those will really help you to drive that sense of focus and to demonstrate greater impact because you're really focused then on the right things. So identifying the priority list up front, working with your researchers on then honing that to determine where you should really lean in into the research priorities. And then based on those research priorities, what insights specifically will drive the biggest lift right now? And I think that sort of funneled approach in thinking about your priorities in that way and in that order will make sure that you're really driving the right types of impact and the right reach for your product teams.
Honestly, I'm jotting down those notes for myself, even as a marketer. I'm like, I feel like those are applicable to our field specifically. Um, Devin, thank you so much. That was awesome. Let's actually move into, we want to hear from everybody else here. Let's move into the Q&A portion. Once again, I encourage folks to drop their questions into the Q&A box specifically rather than the chat. Hopefully there wasn't any that we missed in the chat. Give us just a second and I will pull a couple questions for you. First one from Christian. How do you structure your research results? It'd be interesting to know how you organize tags, etc. And then also, how do you have a structured process that's easy to follow so that others can go out and do research on your behalf, as you mentioned, the enable portion?
I love this question. I would say I structure my research results dependent upon the situation and the methodology. If it is a very, very quick and yet still very clean research that needs to be done, then it may be old school, just using like hashtags in a Word document or bold or italicized words to highlight specific themes as we're working through, let's say, an interview and just tagging it that way. I've worked with teams that use Airtable or other advanced data structured products in order to have some advanced taggings. It really depends on your comfort level and your area of expertise. The thing that I would say is whatever you're most comfortable with that will drive the right results efficiently is where you should focus on structuring your research and how you should focus on tagging your results, because that's ultimately what's important. Now, if you're doing that for someone else or preparing that for someone else to lead and to do, it depends then on the level of consultation. So let's think about this as a consultation project. I am going to prepare an analysis framework for you to conduct your research within because I'm going to be leading the analysis. In that case, I want what's best for me to be able to make sense of the results. So a good example of that would be based on every research question that's asked in an interview, let's say, I might have a section in the analysis template that has that same question and asks people to jot their notes down within that section. That way, when I go through the analysis, I can look at each question and the answer, question and answer. It allows me to do my tagging and analysis a lot quicker. But if they're doing the analysis, then I go back to that first answer that I gave, which is allow that individual to do what feels comfortable to them. And if they don't know, if they haven't done research before, or they're curious about your perspective, then give them a very simple way of tagging their information. Maybe just what I've seen with usability tests is the rainbow chart, where you have your respondents or your customers that you're interviewing in the columns and your questions or your tasks you're giving them in the rows. And then you highlight green if they passed a task successfully, yellow if they had partial success, and then red if they did not have success, if they were not able to complete that activity. And that rainbow chart's a good way for new people who are new to analysis to quickly get a sense of what they learned, in this case, a usability test. So that's a robust way of saying it does depend on your methodology and your situation. However, those are a few examples that I might give when providing guidance to someone else.
Excellent. We have another question ready from Brian. How have you approached big swing layout changes when trying to leverage UX research to guide the direction you take in the design? Sorry, let me know if you need me to read that again. I got a little jumped.
Big swing layout changes. Ooh, I'm not sure I understand, but I'm gonna guess that it means like when you're redesigning an entire page and it's just lots of things are changing. It's not just like an optimization or something like that. I would say leverage the insights and yes to your assumption. Great, glad I got that right. Use the insights and the data that you have to back each and every design decision that you make within that big swing layout change. So let's say, for example, you're getting rid of the hero banner at the top and you're going to have like a module with 3 images instead and brief descriptors below. Why 3? Why not 2? Why not 1 with a brief descriptor below? What was the insight or the piece of data that suggested that people anchor to 3 pieces of information more or less than 1? Let's say you're completely getting rid of the carousel because analytics told you that nobody scrolls past the first image in the first place. Well, great. Make a decision, a design decision around that big swing layout change based on analytics or based on the insights that you have. So I would highlight each piece and each component and compartmentalized version of that layout change and tie it back to the data that you had in order to make that decision. And if you don't have that data, now you have a great opportunity for doing research. You can create a research roadmap based on that to fill in the gaps of your knowledge so that you can make a big swing layout change successfully, knowing that you're on the right track or that you're at least making data informed decisions. Now, if people just wanted a website redesign because you had an old layout, it's been old for a while, and leadership says we need something new, and this is the first time you're doing something, then traditional, tried and true, do an evaluative study on the current layout, understand what's not working, and then from that, create a suite of different concepts for that big swing changes. And then from those varying concepts, do a concept evaluation study to understand what resonates and what doesn't with customers so that you have a good sense of the direction that you should take.
Yeah. We're actually working on updating our own website, so I'm like jotting down my own notes here. Thank you, Brian. Next one, Aubrey. When there isn't a UXR function, how do you balance design work and UXR work to ensure quality and speed?
I love this question because not all of us have dedicated sub-disciplines within our relevant businesses. And I've certainly worked within teams where, as a designer, I was the jack of all trades, master of none, and wearing many different hats, including research. I think what's important, and something that I briefly mentioned on earlier, but I'll expand on, is identifying what cadence your work is happening within. Are you doing month sprints, 3-week sprints, 2-week sprints, 1-week sprints? And where does your product partners and your engineers focus their time, and how do they focus their time? Once you identify the rhythm at which you're operating to deliver your products and services, that will enable you to find those pockets of inserting design and research work. And a good example of this is when I was recently leading the top of house product team at Capital One, we had identified that within our 2-week sprints, we were asking similar questions when we were creating design comps. So every design comp would say, well, we're going to make this assumption based on the previous insights that we had here. And what became relevant to us is after a few weeks, we thought, well, we have kind of a small handful of questions here and a handful of research questions there. And we don't really have enough to create a whole separate study about every single week or every other week. And so we decided to do a study once a month that incorporates all of these sort of benchmarked questions that we had along the way. So that way in 4 sprints, we were able to create a full study guide and run one big study a month. And that was the cadence that worked for us. And that really resonated with our product partners. And everybody got behind it because every different product team that was focused on different functions within the product had those questions that they were burning for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So they were really excited when we finally got to do research and got to get answers to those questions. So that was a cadence and a speed that worked for us. You'll have to find one that works for you and that balances and respects the other work on your plate, such as delivering design as well.
Aubrey actually had a follow-up question, so I'll flag this one too. Also, how do you win hearts and minds in product to promote generative research over continuous small iterations?
Oh, the biggest way to win the heart, I love that, win the hearts and minds, is to demonstrate its power. Well, Devin, that's the chicken or the egg. How do we do that if we can't get buy-in? I would highly advise you to think about it this way. You don't need buy-in for doing generative research. You need to be creative in how you fit it in and ask for forgiveness, not permission in this case. So here's an example. We once were faced with a very similar thing when delivering iterations of product research, usability specifically. We're doing many different iterations of rapid research every single week in order to deliver new mobile phone plans. This was when I had worked at Verizon. And we couldn't really fit in a ton of generative research at the time. What we did was we inserted one or two generative user needs-based questions at the beginning or the end of every usability test. So after 4 weeks' time, we actually had some deep insights about the needs, underlying behaviors and needs of our customers, because we'd asked those generative questions. We'd weaved them in to the more operational and more optimizational type of research that we were doing. And so you don't need to get buy-in for a big, meaty study. That's not what the goal should be. The goal should be to identify what are the answers that you need to have. What are the sort of answers that you think generative research will solve for? And based on the work you're already doing, are there ways to stretch it a little bit, to start scratching that itch just a little bit? Because then after 1 or 2 sprints, you have data, you have stories to bring back to your product partners, not asking for permission to do the work, but you're now asking them for forgiveness and say, hey, here's actually everything we learned about our customers in the past 2 sprints that drastically changes our understanding of how they use our product. This is because we did these things. Can we do some more of this? And now they can see the power. You've demonstrated the importance of that work rather than asking for the permission to do it in the first place.
That's some really awesome some awesome to-dos, I think, because that's a question I think we hear a lot is like, how do I get buy-in or permission to do this thing? I feel like we could talk about that forever. I'll have a note to myself. We have a really great People Nerds piece from a D-Scouter, Charles Perry, who kind of echoes the same thing. It's like he gives some suggestions on where you can like just do it or where you can just like, start incorporating it without having, it doesn't have to be like a big budget, big ticket project. It can just, there are ways of weaving it in, as you said. I'll keep going. I know we only have a few minutes left. From Elise, how do you deal with collaborators who like to attend or interview themselves, but take responses they hear at face value without digging or doing analysis? For example, the user I interviewed wants this, so let's just do exactly that.
Yeah, that is definitely a challenge. I would say it would be interesting 2 things. Firstly, to explain to your collaborators that what someone does and what someone says can inherently be different, and always remind them of that fact and provide examples. There's a plethora of case studies out there, so I won't try to remember them all right now, but look some up because there are some well-documented examples of where that has fallen really flat by just doing exactly what people ask for rather than doing something that they truly need. And one thing that seems to resonate with some doesn't resonate with others. A mantra that really exemplifies this is the Ford approach. If you've ever heard, Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would tell me a faster horse. Well, he didn't ask what they wanted. He invented the car, and that revolutionized, of course, the way that we move around the world. So that's a good example of him not asking what people needed, but him identifying, actually, let me say, him not asking what people wanted, but him identifying what people needed. And that's a big difference. So I would try that first. Secondarily, understand the propensity of your collaborator to want to take that at face value and run with it. Often, it's not a malicious thing. Our partners just simply have a need for speed. They have a deadline they need to meet. They need to move forward fast. They got an answer that they were looking for. The user said this thing, they're being user-centric, so let's move forward. Helping to understand the pressures that they may be under the decisions that they need to make with that research will enable you to better understand their world and their perspective as to why they would take that at face value in the first place, which will enable you to better have that conversation with them around, hey, here's what happens when we take things at face value. I know you want to move really quickly. I do too. If we just look at these things, what they did here in the usability test, they actually said they really liked this page, but they couldn't figure it out. That's more important than them saying they liked it, for example. So all that to be said, try to work with your collaborator, understand their points of view and their starting points, and also explain to them that what people say and what they do are just not always the same.
I love that. Also, hopefully you can't hear any sirens in the background, fire truck going by. From Jana, have you had to advocate for your team's role to shift from consult to lead? How did you make your case successfully?
I will say a specific example doesn't come to mind right now, but yes, I have had to do that. And I would say if I were faced with that today, the case that I would have is firstly to ask myself, why is it that I think that we need to take the lead on a project when we had originally agreed to or started to consult? One typical case that I could imagine is where the study plan was created in a biased manner or in a way that provides or could provide biased or unilateral results. In that particular case, what would be important is for you to clearly identify the areas of bias or the areas of issue that the places you take issue with, and highlight that to the individuals at your peer set. So, for example, at Capital One, I was the head of research, the director of research there. And so I would need to go to my peer director of product and design and have an honest conversation and say, hey, here are some of the things that I'm noticing around a study that's happening right now. And I think that you're not going to get the results that you're looking for. Here's why. And really show them that if they continue on this track, there's going to be an issue. And in that case, I wouldn't overtly advocate for my team taking the lead because I don't know if that's necessarily the answer. That is a consensus that we need to come to as a leadership team. But they need to understand the problem first. So by understanding the problem that I see and making sure that they see the same problem, then together we work on the solution. Is it that I take the lead? Or maybe I just need to provide more consulting up front to help them shape it a bit more, to help them hone their perspective a little bit deeper so that we're driving quality results. But if I do end up saying, yeah, we need to take the lead, we should take this over, then in that case, just getting that buy-in is going to be really important. And typically it's, if we keep that down this road, here's going to be the result. If we take the lead, here's going to be the benefit and your benefit. I think selfishly, it's easy to think about ourselves and why we want to take the lead on something. It's more difficult and more important to put yourself in their shoes. What do they get out of it? What is the benefit to your collaborator if you take it off their plate? So making sure to frame it that way is going to be really crucially important if you're trying to take something from someone in any case.
Great answer. So we have about 1 minute left. I have a handful of questions about Gen AI. We can answer, I'll answer one, or I'll have Devin answer one, and then we'll wrap things up. I'll also want to encourage folks quickly to join the People Nerds Slack community if you haven't already. Devin's in there. We can answer some of your questions there as well. One quick question from Jess. I feel like the number of people who can do research pretty well is the quick and probably cleaner that we've typically seen is going to increase dramatically as AIs improve and become more ubiquitous. Have you given thought to applying this framework in a world that is more human-robot hybrid with more generalist or hybrid roles?
Yes, I have given thought to that. In fact, I would advocate for doing this type of framework even more in a world where AI is augmenting a lot of what we do. And the reason being is because our roles as designers and researchers will inherently shift when some of the more, I'll call it mundane, but not everybody would agree with that statement, aspects of our work are being supported through artificial intelligence. An example of this is, what does a researcher lead if AI can help to generate a moderation guide based on a database of insights they already have or don't have. And then that same AI sort of assistant, so to speak, could do 80% of the analysis on the other end. Well, what is a researcher's role? Well, your role is not just to do research. Your role is to be a translator of insights into business action and to help steer the portfolio of insights work in order to make sure that the business is making the right decisions for the product and for themselves and ultimately for your customers. And it is researchers who have the expertise in intelligence gathering that will be the orchestrators of all of these pieces in order to make sure that the research portfolio is buttoned up, organized, and intentional. And that will become more of the role. It will become more of an evangelist. It will become more of a translator for user insights into business needs and decisions. And it will become less of creating moderation guide questions and analyzing the results of those questions. While that is a sad future for some individuals who really love getting in the weeds of the research, I do think that that is the future that we have in front of us. And likewise to designers and even engineers, building and creating comps themselves will become a little less of the job. And designers will become more problem solvers and orchestrators of making trade-off decisions that still support the needs of customers and the business, and looking more across the entire journey of a customer, across multiple touch points and multiple different aspects of a product, rather than just focusing on creating the checkout page, because that can often be created by AI leveraging your existing design system, for example. And so when thinking about how AI can augment the work that we do, it's really important, even more so, to think about, as an evangelist, as a translator, how does your role shift in what you choose to lead, consult, and enable?
Amazing. Thank you so much, Devin. And thank you everyone for hanging on with us for a couple extra minutes. That was an amazing webinar. Like I said before, we will share the recording, so stay tuned. I also I threw a QR link up here for your copy of Devin's Lead, Consult, or Enable framework, so definitely grab it. We'll also send it in the email. Like I said, I encourage everybody to join the People Nerds SOC community, especially if you did not get some of your questions answered. We had a ton. Really appreciate everybody jumping in and engaging. Like I said, we'll send out a recap email shortly. Devin, thank you so much again. We'll be hearing from you again, and I'm sure in a lot of different places. So
thank you so much. Appreciate you, everyone.
thank you all. We'll see you soon.